Unfortunately, our Dean Anna-Maija Poikkeus is unable to attend today, and I will be taking her place in hosting this webinar today. My name is Jenni Salminen, and I work as a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Teacher Education at the University of Jyväskylä. Just a few opening words before we proceed to our presentations. So as you are probably aware, Global Innovation Network for Teaching and Learning India is a network in which Finnish higher education institutions, together with their partners from India, co-create research-based solutions to global educational challenges and collaborate in research and education. The network is also seeking opportunities to facilitate staff and student mobility initiatives between Finland and India in educational sciences and teacher training. The network was initiated with the funding by the Ministry of Education and Culture of Finland and is coordinated by the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. The Nordic Center in India, on the other hand, is a consortium of leading universities and research institutions in Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden, established in 2001 with the objective to facilitate cooperation in research and higher education between the Nordic countries and India. NCI facilitates and supports a wide range of study and research activities in India and in the Nordic countries. This is the fourth webinar of the Promoting Indo-Finnish Collaboration in Teaching and Learning, a webinar series for academia and practitioners. And the generic aim of the webinar series is to bring together Finnish and Indian academics and practitioners from the field of education. In these webinars, Indian and Finnish experts share their knowledge and good practices on different educational topics. Today's interesting theme, approaches to child-centered pedagogy in early childhood education and care, is particularly important for at least two reasons. Firstly, early childhood education and care forms a solid foundation and first steps on the path of lifelong learning, along with facilitating sustainable and equal opportunities for the children in the broader society. Secondly, the centrality of children's agency, child perspectives, and active participation have been recognized as central values and leading principles of children's learning and development. Consequently, the broad concept of child-centered pedagogy seems particularly useful in examining these affordances in ECEC pedagogy. Today, we have a great privilege of hearing four interesting presentations from esteemed experts in the field. During the first hour of the webinar, we will hear two presentations of 20 minutes, followed by around 10 minutes time slot for questions and comments. And then during the second half of the webinar, similarly, we have two 20-minute speeches, and the webinar will be concluded with around 10 minutes time slot for questions and comments. I will do my best in maintaining the time frame, and I will also briefly introduce each of the presenters. So perhaps without a further ado, I will now present the first speaker, who is Sunisha Ahuja. And Sunisha is an education specialist with UNICEF India, currently leading UNICEF India's work in the area of foundational learning, including early childhood education, supporting national and state governments in 14 states. She provides technical support to the Ministry of Women and Child Development and Ministry of Education, Government of India. Sunisha has been working in the education sector for 3 decades, working with several national and international civil society organizations, including working with Mobile Crash and Care India. She has also worked as a consultant to the Ministry of Education, Government of India, focusing on out-of-school children, especially child workers and urban deprived children, and early language and literacy learning programs. So with this introduction, Sunisha, the floor is yours.
Much and good morning, good afternoon to all of those who are here with us today for this webinar series. And I'm really grateful to the organizers for inviting me to come and share with all of you about early childhood care and education in India. And as was mentioned in my introduction, I work with colleagues, my UNICEF colleagues in 14 states, and with UNICEF's mandate to support, to provide technical support to the national and state government. In my presentation, I will try and provide the context in which child-centered pedagogy is kind of attempted to be implemented. And I'll primarily be focusing on government provisioning of early childhood care and education in India. So I just want to kind of set the context of my presentation by sharing with you, and I'm really coming from the fact that I'm not sure how much about the way governance in India is actually done and how the early childhood care and education programs are implemented in India. So in my first few slides, I'll talk about that and then talk about a research that UNICEF supported and what were some of the interesting insights we got around child-centered pedagogy. I will talk about that. So to start with, India has had a very large integrated early childhood development program that's more than 4 decades old, which was started in 1975, and I'm largely going to focus on that particular program. Uh, in the more recent years, I would like to say that India passed a Right to Education Act, making education, school education for children 6 to 14 years free and compulsory. However, this particular act does not cover children in the age group of 3 to 6 years. So while education is a fundamental right for children 6 to 14 years, it is the intent of the state or the government to provide free early childhood care and education to all children 3 to 6 year old. In 2013, India adopted a national early childhood care education policy, and this policy covered children below the age of 6 years. And now, recently in 2020, India has actually adopted a new national education policy after almost 3 decades. And this policy covers children in the age group of 3 to 18 years. So this is for the first time, the entire continuum of the age of 3 to 8 years, which is globally also acknowledged as a continuum of learning, is now recognized and is also referenced as the foundational stage of learning. So this is just to kind of give you an overview of the policy framework for within which early childhood care and education program provisioning is happening in India. Uh, just wanted to also tell you about, what are the modalities of provisioning of preschool education or early childhood education in India. We have multiple models. We have government provisioning, we have private sector provisioning. So one of the largest programs that we have in India, which is a government-run program, these are ECD centers. There are 1.4 million ECD centers in India, and these centers provide 6 services. One of the 6 services includes preschool education, and these are referred to as Anganwadi centers or play centers within the community. Uh, we have schools that have pre-primary sections, but the duration of the pre-primary or preschool education program across states in India is different. It could be a 1 year preschool program, it could be a 2 year preschool program, and not all schools have this pre-primary provisioning. And then, of course, we have the standalone private preschools. There is a very robust, large private sector. And moving forward, as I will show you the data, there is a very large percentage of children in the age group of 3 to 6 years who go to these private preschools and the reasons for parents to send their children to these private schools. We'll talk about that in the following slides. Okay. So I'm now going to talk to you about a study that UNICEF supported. And this study was done in collaboration with a university in Delhi, where there is a Center for Early Childhood Care and Education and Development, along with Asar Center, and Samyukta represents that organization. Uh, and this particular study actually followed 14,000 children. It's a longitudinal study which followed 14,000 children from age 4 to age 8 across 3 different geographies in the country. The idea behind the study was, one, to understand the extent of access to early childhood education services. Two, it was to look at the quality of the services that children are getting. What are some of those good practices that are also happening? Not, to kind of identify what could be those components of good practices that we need to really bring into the mainstream system. So what did this study tell us? And this is a study which happened between 2012 to 2017. And it's a very large study. We have not had a study of this scale in India so far. So it gave us a lot of good insights. One, the fact that the government provisioning of preschool education was universal. The 1.4 million centers that we have, they really cover the length and breadth of the country. They are centers that are located in very remote, inaccessible areas. Each of these centers has two people. So there is an Anganwadi worker who's the ECD worker and a helper. And they are both kind of community workers. They're from the same community, and they provide all the 6 services, which include supplementary nutrition, immunization, as well as preschool education. The other thing that was evident in this study was that uh, there were 70% children were actually enrolled somewhere in some kind of a preschool facility. And there was also already a lot of private provisioning that was coming up in different states. And this private provisioning varied across the states, some states having much more compared to other states. So this was something that was a very positive picture to us in terms of that most children were really enrolled. However, we still had the last mile, the most vulnerable, the most marginalized children from the most economically weaker homes that are still not enrolled in any programs. Uh, Uh, the other very interesting finding from this study, and this is again, related to the context in India. In India, while preschool age group is seen as 3 to 6 years, and like I said, the right to education said that the age of entry to class 1 should be 6 years plus. However, given that we are a federal structure, while the national government provides frameworks and guidance, states do have the flexibility to take their own decisions. So we still have several states in India, and 2 of the states in this study, Rajasthan and Telangana, the age of entry into primary school is 5 years. So children do not necessarily attend a 3-year preschool education program before they join grade 1. And the trends, the kind of trends that we saw was that, if we actually look at children in the age group of 3 and 4 years, in some states 3 and 4 year olds don't go to any preschool. So just to kind of pick up an example of one of the states, Rajasthan, uh, you will find that at age 5, most children are enrolled somewhere. It could be a primary school or it could be a preschool. And what this study really told us, and which you will see in my data in the next slide, the enrollments kind of started to stabilize. The enrollment kind of start to stabilize around the age of 8. So you may go into a school where there are a lot of younger age group children who are sitting in grade 1. And this kind of a mixed age presence is more prevalent in government schools as compared to private schools, because private schools often have a preschool education program before children get into primary classes. Uh, so here is data from another report, which is called the ASSER report. This is an annual survey that is done in rural parts of India. And this is data from 2018, which provides an age-wise, kind of overview of where children at different ages are enrolled. And here I just like to kind of point out to you a few very significant data points. Uh, Please note that at age 5, 27% children are already in private preschools, and about 24% children, 5-year-olds, are actually in government schools and they are in grade 1. Uh, you will also note that at age 3, there are about 29% children who are not enrolled in any preschool or school. Even at age 4, about 15% children are not enrolled in preschool or schools. And one of the challenges that we face in our school system is that there is a large percentage. In fact, a recent data points out that it's only 50% children in grade 1 who come with some preschool experience. Rest of the 50% children have not really attended any preschool before they have joined grade 1. Uh, this is an enrollment trend of children in grades across grades. And as was evident in the previous table also, you can see that there are 22% children in grade 1 who are below the age of 5 years. And that makes it very challenging for teachers, because teachers are really kind of trained to transact a grade 1 curriculum, and children in those classrooms are not developmentally ready for participating in a very formal curriculum that's being transacted in class 1. Now let's look at the quality of preschool education, and if we're talking about child-centered pedagogy in preschool education programs, like I said, this particular study looked at what is the kind of quality of programming children are really accessing. This study, we looked at both the government ECD centers as well as private preschools. And what was really disturbing in terms of what came out from this data, that about 18% of the time in a government preschool program and about 40% of the time in a private preschool was being spent on teaching of formal 3 Rs. So there was a lot of focus on reading, writing, rote memorization. Uh, there was very little that was being done around storytelling or free play activities, which are really the cornerstone of a developmentally appropriate, age appropriate program that should really be implemented with children in the age group of 3 to 6 years. And here I'd also like to kind of flag another issue. The ECD programs the ECD centers where children attend the preschool education program, the Anganwadi worker or the ECD worker, she's kind of providing 6 services, which includes immunization, supplementary nutrition. She's also reaching out to pregnant and breastfeeding, pregnant women, mothers who are breastfeeding their babies. She has to do health education with them. So she's somebody who's a multitask worker, and therefore, how much time and effort she's really able to put into a preschool education program, that has been a challenge. And several studies have actually pointed out to us that one on an average less than 90 minutes per day are really dedicated to preschool education, and that time also is not really enriched with activities that are really are developmentally appropriate for children during that period. Given that these were some of the issues that we are all aware of, uh, UNICEF, and the other thing that this study really also brought out, and I'm sure all of you here who are attending this webinar are also very much aware that a good quality preschool education program has a direct correlation to learning in later grades. And this also came out very clearly in this study that was done across 3 different geographies. What was also what was also a finding from this study, given the poor quality of programming that was being implemented, most children at age 5 were not really ready for school. They did not have the school readiness abilities, and therefore they had a more challenging start when they joined formal learning. So, sure. Thank you so much. So, like I said, significant positive association between the quality of a program and school readiness levels. And what was very, very evident was that the formal teaching of reading, writing actually had a negative impact on school readiness scores for children. Uh, so, given this context, it was important for all of us, to really think that what are the kind of changes that we'd really like to see happen as part of preschool education, how to make it more child centered, how to make it more developmentally appropriate, and move away from the fact that there is this very high aspiration of getting children to be part of English medium schools, and that has been a big challenge, and something that is now being kind of addressed through the new national education policy that India has adopted in 2020. So there have been some really significant changes that have now been adopted as part of our new national education policy. The policy now acknowledges that 3 years of preschool, uh, along with the first 2 years at school, should be really looked at as a continuum of learning, which is now called the foundational stage of learning. And a lot of efforts are going on now in terms of making sure that when we are developing the curriculum for this stage, we make sure that the curriculum is in a continuum, and that there is a smooth transition for children from the preschools to early grades within the school. However, what also, one of the big challenge for us at this point of time that we are trying to address is, given the different models of preschool education in our country, there are different standards of quality for the program. And how do we make sure that there are certain non-negotiables that will be there for each and every model to be supported, because the inputs provided for each of these models are very, very different, because each of these programs are also implemented by different ministries for us in India. So at this point of time, the big focus for all of us in India is to ensure the coordination between multiple government departments, ensure that new ECC curriculum that we make is developmentally appropriate, is in a continuum, and it really focuses. And therefore, how do we do the capacity building of not only those 1.4 million ECD workers, but all those preschool teachers who will probably get hired or recruited as schools start to add new preschool classes in schools. And here I've shared links to two particular articles that were published in Indian newspapers. I will share my presentation and I hope all of you will have access to these newspaper articles, because they also highlight some very interesting positive things that are also happening within these centers, given all these challenges that we have, where several innovations are being tried out, how communities are engaging with the centers. And I'm sure Samyukta will be able to talk about that much more in her presentation. And for us, at the end of my presentation, what I would like to say is the biggest challenge for us at this point of time is how do we make sure that our preschools don't become like schools, but our early grades in schools become more like the preschools. The play-based pedagogy really comes into our school classrooms rather than our preschools becoming like school classrooms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sunisha, for your inspirational talk. It was very educational, at least from my perspective. I felt that I learned a lot of new things from the Indian ECEC system. Thank you very much. And I have to remind at this point that we will return to possible questions after the next presentation, and the audience can insert their questions to the chat. So moving onwards in our program, it is my great pleasure to introduce the second presenter of the webinar, and she is Dr. Kati Rintakorpi. And she has worked in early childhood education for 30 years as a teacher, kindergarten entrepreneur, leader, and educator, and over the recent years implementing the expert of early childhood education, for example, to Asia. Kati's dissertation dealt with the possibilities of pedagogical documentation in the development of early childhood education and cooperation with families. In her education, Kati combines her solid practical skills with a theoretical examination in a child-oriented way. Kati, the floor is yours.
Your great presentation. It resonated strongly with the Finnish system too, and it's good to continue the quality talk after you. I'm going to talk about pedagogical documentation as a development tool in early childhood education and care. And this is a topic that we have been discussing quite a lot in Finland during the recent years, so it's quite a hot topic. Okay, I tried to do it again. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Does it work now? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. I have 2 points in this presentation. We will start from discussing the idea of developing early childhood education and care. And to be able to develop something, we, of course, first need to know where we are now. Related to that question, we need to know where we want to go, what are our goals. And thirdly, we need to find out what needs to be done to get from point A to point B. To formulate the answer, I'll match up the tool of pedagogical documentation in the development process of early childhood education and care, ECEC. Usually the curriculum serves us as our map in the terrain of teaching and learning. However, we need to ask if the map is working, as did Sunisha also in her presentation. The world is changing fast, and so are the requirements of knowledge. Do we teach and learn the 21st century skills, which are quite different from the skills we needed yesterday? Is our curriculum up to date? Also, there are many levels in the curriculum. Does the national or local curriculum serve every child in my class? Am I able to implement the curriculum in a way which talks to each one of them? Can we answer to their needs and areas of interests in a child-oriented way? Or do we hang to the ideas of the old world, believing that we can transfer the best knowledge to children if they just listen and sit down quietly? The curriculum should be the framework for quality. It's based on the values of the society. The curriculum steers the educators to focus on the things which are valued. Values tell about what good early childhood education should aim at and how the daily work is done. Accordingly, values guide all activities and express the perception of even good life and good society. When we talk about the quality, we face the fact that among the educators, parents, and children, there are many different views on what is high quality early childhood education and care. We have subjective views based on our earlier experiences, level of education, and worldview. Our views also are value-based. For example, a religious teacher thinks that education should include praying, and an atheist cannot accept it. Maybe our curriculum has something to say about it, as in Finland. The views on quality also change in time and culture. What is valued in Finland is not necessarily valued in India. According to Finnish National Education Evaluation Center, the understanding about what is considered as high level or acceptable level of quality in early childhood education should be constructed together in a joint conversation between the educators, also the parents and children. To organize these discussions is one of the most important tasks of the kindergarten manager. This is how they should implement their pedagogical leadership. How can we assess the quality of early childhood education and care? In Finland, we don't evaluate children in daycare. Educators use self-assessment to evaluate the activities and their work in relation what their understanding about the quality is. Kindergarten is not a factory, and in the end of the day, we cannot count how many unbroken boxes, packages we got today from the assembly line. Rather, kindergarten is a library of people, feelings, ideas, cultures, knowledge, skills, and incidents. How can we assess the quality of them? The Latin word assidere means sitting by someone, And that's what is our goal in early childhood education and care assessment and development work in Finland. The teachers take their colleagues, children and parents to sit on the same bench and having multi-perspective discussion which steers the development work. However, we need some tools to help us to collect and record information in order to remember, analyze, and understand what is going on in our work and in children's lives and learning. The tool is called pedagogical documentation. The background of pedagogical documentation is in educational sciences, especially early childhood education and care. To conceptualize pedagogical documentation, we can say that the documentation means creating the material for the pedagogical development process. When we document, we take photos, fill out forms, interview children, collect their drawings into their folders, and so on. We actually collect traces about what is going on. And only when we start to utilize those documents in our pedagogical work, we move to the area of pedagogical documentation. That's when we sit on the bench together with children, colleagues, and parents, open the folders and talk about the pictures, photos, and results of the interviews. We ask, what can we learn through the documents? What is the current state of things? What issues or ideas are peeping behind the documents? How can we utilize our findings in planning and implementing our work with these children and these families? How do their perspectives resonate with the official curriculum, the framework of quality? Being a teacher is like being a researcher. The teachers should have their feelers up at every turn in order to recognize the emerging issues in the class and in the community. The teachers should be able to collect data in their class and analyze it together with children, parents, and colleagues. According to the results, the curriculum of the class should be developed all the time. Pedagogical documentation is a method for making learning visible, listening to children's voices, reflecting and sharing everyday activities, and understanding what is going on in children's learning. Pedagogical documentation makes the process of planning and assessment systematic and helps the educators to focus on the most essential factors. Pedagogical documentation is an everyday method which is used together with children and parents because children construct their learning in cooperation with others, the environment, and different things and phenomena they encounter. Supported by pedagogical documentation and curriculum, the teachers formulate objectives which are flexible and adapted to the interests and needs of children. This means that the practical, everyday curriculum emerges in the dialogical relationship between the child, the children, the teacher, the parents, and the community. The process of pedagogical documentation is open and allows different perspectives. It's part of the daily learning activities of children and also adults. For example, children and adults can take photos when the group has a trip to the forest, or they can shoot short videos about the games and other activities. Next morning or in the end of the week, children and educators stop by the documents and discuss them. They assess together the activities, share how some difficult thing was solved or an idea invented. The documents support their memory and collect things together. With the support of the documents, they can draw conclusions, express their thoughts and feelings, and plan together how to continue with some topic or learning project. Pedagogical documentation can gradually collect the pieces of some learning project and show the process of learning in the walls of the kindergarten. Before the documents are shared with children, the educators do preliminary analysis to the mass of documents to dig out the diamonds which possibly bring forth the learning process of children. Accordingly, the process of pedagogical documentation is not neutral, and we need to recognize it. The ethical problem might be that we use documents to manipulate children or parents, for example, to share only those documents which make us look clever and competent in the eyes of the parents. It is also possible that instead of increasing children's participation in planning and assessing the activities, we put children to the showcase and step into their personal area without respect. That's nice. Early childhood education and care is an environment full of almost invisible and fast-changing situations, encounters, feelings, and insights. The visible activities have a meta level in the participants' personal learning and experiences. By using pedagogical documentation, we have some possibilities to collect the traces which can steer our work as educators in the fast-paced reality in relation with our students' lives. We need to remember that pedagogical documentation does not prove evidence of something. It's a subjective tool. However, it gives us hints about what might be the best building material for the learning and well-being of these children in this class today. When the proposals we get by discussing the documents are set into relation with our curriculum and quality framework, we get more information about where to focus, what methods to use, and how to adjust our physical, psychological, and social learning environments to enhance the quality of early childhood education and care. Thank you. Great to have this talk with you today.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Kati, for this very inspirational talk. It was lovely to hear about the details of pedagogical documentation and curriculum. As we proceed in the program, we now have a couple of minutes, maybe 10 minutes, a bit more than that, to discuss the questions from the audience. And there are actually two questions, one for Sunisha and one for Kati. So perhaps I will read both the questions aloud, and then you can choose in which order you would like to reply. So the question for Sunisha was, in your opinion, what would it require from Indian early childhood education to increase and support play-based learning? And how do you think that the NEP will address the gap in terms of availability of trained ECEC teachers And how do you think ECEC teachers can be integrated into the present Angwadi system? Also, is there a mode to assess the delivery of ECEC and ensure its quality across India? And for Kati, the question is, how can the progressive system of pedagogical reporting work in a larger and more complex setting like India? And there are also a bit further questions for Kati with regards to Finnish ECEC system. So what are the major challenges Finland faces in ECEC, and how climate change is projected in early childhood curricula? So maybe I will just give you the floor and please feel free to respond.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. Both the questions are very relevant and very important. And I think the new national education policy for us is an opportunity to really revisit our early childhood education program design, the content, the modes of delivery, the quality standards. And one interesting data point that I'd like to again share here. There was a study done by World Bank almost more than a decade back, which pointed out that India spends a very small percentage of its GDP on early childhood care and education. And even after more than a decade, if we look at our financial provisioning for early childhood care and education, we haven't really made a very significant progress in that area. And given the scale of the work, the numbers, like the numbers that I mentioned, we're talking about millions of children and millions of ECD workers. Uh, what we really need is a very strong institutional framework that would actually be able to support in terms of not only developing the ECC curriculum, or as well as capacity building programs for preschool teachers. Currently in India, given this large size that we only have 250 institutions that provide a 2-year preschool teacher education program. And which means we only get about 10,000 preschool trained teachers every year. And very quickly, these teachers actually get absorbed by the private sector. Now that the government has started to kind of acknowledge that preschool education is very much part of a school learning kind of continuum, uh, I am very positive that this is, strengthening our existing institutions, expanding the institutional framework for developing more preschool teachers who have the training to implement preschool education programs will be a priority for us moving forward. And in terms of integrating these preschool trained teachers into Anganwadi centers, the last point that I'd like to really make is one of the big advocacy at this point of time that's happening through civil society organizations, including UNICEF and other partners, is to try and get the government to commit for a dedicated ECC teacher within the ECD centers. Because there are studies that have shown us that if we have a dedicated person for preschool education, it really has a significant impact on the quality of preschool education. As what I had mentioned in the models, there are some of these ECD centers that are physically located within schools. One of the attempts that's being done currently with about 38 and working very closely with the ECD, the Anganwadi worker and the teacher. And we hope that, we've set very ambitious goals for ourselves in the country based on the new education policy. And I hope that we'll be able to also get the government to increase its investment in the area of preschool education, so that we are really able to bring all of those pieces together. And last piece, yes, UNICEF, along with a few partners, has created certain tools to address this issue of quality. And we've tried and we piloted it in a few locations, and we are still trying to kind of improve upon that tool so that it becomes more like a coaching and a mentoring tool for the person who's delivering the service, rather than an inspection kind of a model that often kind of gets implemented more easily than not. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunisha. There is another request for you, a question whether it's possible to share a link to research behind the chart of school readiness in your presentation. So maybe you can share the link as instructed in the speaker chat. And in terms of having equal time for both presenters, I will now hand the floor to Kati to respond to your questions.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for the questions. They are not easy, of course, easy to answer. The first question, or one of the questions, is that how can the progressive system of pedagogical reporting work in larger and more complex settings like India? It would be interesting to talk with you about this topic, but I have some ideas, or maybe not answers, but some ideas. Each educator and the educator team, the kindergarten staff, works with these children in this class, in this kindergarten. Despite the size of the country or the size of the popular, how many people there are always the individuals who are related with each other in education. So it's not a problem to bring the method of pedagogical documentation to that process between people and the kindergarten environments. But of course, it's a question of educating the teachers and other educators, also the parents. And maybe the most difficult thing also in Finland is to help or support the educators to change their mindset, to start to think in a child-oriented way, and to be ready to open their working practices through pedagogical documentation, because it's challenging to suddenly show what we do and open it for the discussion with the parents or children or so. So yeah, maybe I answer like this. And about the Finnish system, I think maybe Tuovi will be talking something about this too. The main challenges right now are that we don't have enough kindergarten teachers and other kindergarten staff. So it's a bit hypocrite. It's not very nice to talk about high quality and what do you need to do to get the high quality if we don't have enough people in the field doing the job. So that's definitely the main problem. About the climate change, I think it's quite well written into our curriculum in the transversal competence areas which we are teaching to children. The climate change is not written there literally, but children are practicing and learning many skills that support them to grow up as adults who can do something, hopefully, for this really bad situation. Then about the allocation of the government. The government actually pays most of the fees of early childhood education and care. The parents pay a small amount of the fee, daycare fee, and it also depends on the incomes of the family. Some families don't pay anything, and in the whole Finland, the pre-primary education for those children who are 6 years old, it's free for the families, and also in many municipalities, also for 5 years of old children, the education is free. So it's strongly supported by the government. Okay. Maybe I could give you some kind of answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kati. I am sure that the audience got what they wanted. I'm noting that there are only a few minutes left for the question and answer session. However, there are still a couple of questions in the chat. So I suggest that, especially Sunisha, there are questions for you still remaining in the chat, which we don't have quite enough time to go through. So maybe you can try to see if they are something that you can quite briefly respond to the audience through the chat. But moving on with our program, we still have two very interesting and fascinating presentations onwards, and I'm sure that Tuovi's and some Samyukta's presentations will add to what we have heard from Kati and Sunisha. So I will briefly present our third speaker, Tuovi Wallén, who is an expert in early childhood education and learning. Tuovi currently works as a university teacher and educates future early childhood educators at the University of Jyväskylä, Finland. She has worked in early childhood education for over 10 years as a teacher and as an educator, and Tuovi has gained a very strong international experience while working in Qatar, Nepal, and Vietnam. Education export projects are familiar to her, as well as teacher training and education in emergencies. Tuovi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kati. Can you hear me? I think yes. Okay, so it's great to be here, and thank you for Sunisha and Kati, and I will continue. And I'm talking about the importance of play in Finnish early childhood education today. And I'm going to start talking a little bit about the history and overall about the Finnish early childhood education. And then we move on about the play and importance of it. And I have very practical things to show you. I can't here. Okay, so a little bit about the history of the early childhood education in Finland. So the first daycare center opened in 1888, and it was also the first one in the Nordic countries. And only 4 years later, we started 1892. We started the early childhood education teacher training in Finland, and it was also the first training that started in the Nordic countries. Then the government came with it in 1927 when the daycare center started to get some subsidy from the government, from the state, if there were at least 25 children in a group and their day lasted at least 4 hours, and the teacher had to have an early childhood education training. Then in 1973, that was a big year for Finland, the first daycare legislation in Finland called Children's Day Care Act came into force. Then there was a lot of time in between, and in 1995, the training of the early childhood education teachers transferred to the universities. And then that was started that it was only research-based early childhood education as well. And then 2001, we started to have free preschool education for everyone, which means that because the early childhood education, it's not free, like our basic education in Finland is free. We go to school the year we turn 7 years old, so then it's free, but the going to kindergarten, it's not free, and the preschool wasn't free before, but on 2001 it became free for everyone, and it's 4 hours of free education per day for each child. And then if they need to have a longer day, if the parents are working, then it means that then they will pay the fee for the rest of the day. But the 4 hours is free for everyone when you are in a preschool. And then the latest big thing happened in 2018. Our national core curriculum for early childhood education and care states that the early childhood education teacher has to have a university degree, bachelor's or master's. There are a lot of different titles of educators who are working in the kindergartens, but from 2018 onwards, you have to have a university degree to be called as an early childhood education teacher. And then more about the play. Usually it's quite common that the parent might ask when they are picking up their child from the daycare, they might ask, have you just been playing today? And this is how we are kind of showing them and for everyone how much there is happening when you are just playing. And it kind of all the things you are learning through play. Mainly, most the things that you need to be able to do and develop, the children, they learn through play. They learn fine motor skills and gross motor skills, a lot of problem solving when you have to play with others, think about how they feel, how you feel, how it makes you feel. If somebody says something, you develop your creativity, your observation skills. You learn a lot about rules and norms and how to follow the rules. You learn how to solve disagreements. Also, your thinking abilities will develop. You get to practice your friendship skills. You get a lot of joy. Your identity develops while you're playing, and a lot of other things are also happening there while you play. And in our Early Childhood Education and Care Act, and also in the National Core Curriculum for Early Childhood Education, this is how the play shows also in there. So play is very central approach in the early childhood education. We see that it's one of the most important approaches. The main objective for the early childhood education and care is to implement versatile pedagogical activities based on children's play. This is where also the pedagogical documentation comes along, what Kati talked about, that we observe children's play and then we take that into consideration when we plan the pedagogical activities. The children, they have the right to play, learn by playing, and also enjoy. They cannot be forced activities. They learn to build the understanding of themselves, their identity, and the world around them while they play. Play is an activity that motivates the children and brings the joy for them. They learn many skills, as we saw on the previous slide, at the same time, and they gain a lot of new knowledge at the same time. And the play is one way of implementing different areas of learning. And I think one of the most important things is that the play has an absolute value for children. Child doesn't play to learn, but he or she learns by playing. Okay, here we can see one example of the daily schedules. They vary between the kindergartens and between the groups. In each kindergarten, they can kind of decide their own daily schedule, but of course, usually the breakfast, the eating times are similar for everyone. But here you can see that in the morning, children, they arrive to daycare center, and then there is playtime there. It's usually free play, but there might be as well as a guided play. I will talk to you about the free play and guided play a little bit later. But they come to the daycare center and then they start to play. Then usually around 8 o'clock they have a breakfast, and after breakfast there comes a morning circle where we talk about usually what day is it. There might be a child who is presenting what day is it, what kind of weather is it. And then they have some pedagogical activities in small groups. Then after that it's outdoor activities and play again. Then lunch, nap time, and story time after lunch depends on the age of the group. Because children usually might have little quiet reading time and play. And then the day begins with the play and different activities. Then comes afternoon snack, and then it's playtime again. And after indoor play, you usually go outside, and then outdoor activities and play. So this is how we have designed that play. You can see the play throughout the day, and it's there with you almost in every moment throughout the day. And we talk about usually that there are free play and adult-led play. But the free play, voluntary play, means that the children, they have the autonomy to decide what they play, what kind of a play they play, the content, where the play starts, where it ends, who they are playing with, what kind of materials they will use, and how they will use those materials. They decide like who they are, who are part of the play. They are the ones who make all the important decisions. That's what we talk about when we talk about the free play. And then we have guided play, which means usually adult-led play. It means that the educator, the teacher, or somebody else who works in a kindergarten is the one who is making the decisions of the content of the play, where the play takes place, and which children are playing together. And the guided play, the younger the children are, the more important the guided play are, because the guided play, it gives children tools and opportunities for their own free play. And even when we talk about free play, it doesn't mean that the adults or teachers, they are not involved. They are always involved there. Because even the free play, the children need adult guidance there, especially if they have some disagreements or something else. Remind about the rules, or it might be that they have a little bit adults help in the beginning, and then they will continue the free play by themselves. But adults are always there, present. Okay, here I have a few photos for you about different play moments. This is the first one. Here we have a few younger children. They are playing outdoors. I remember they were collecting rocks, and they said that they are collecting jewelry for their play. It was free play, and then you could make it adult-led play, guided play, in a way that you would start making questions about what kind of rocks or jewelry they are collecting, and then you could start comparing them together, and you could make it also guided play in that way. And here is the guided play. The children first, they chose some soft toys from inside, and then they made snow animals or snow whatever outside of them, and it was guided adult-led play. So they were helping, and then the children were making the rest of by themselves. And here we can see a snow turtle that the children made together. And here are two of my former colleagues. This was a long weeks-long play, the free play. Children, one of them brought this to the preschool, and they made their own hut. They colored it and painted it, and then they played inside for several weeks. So this sometimes, even it's a free play and not a guided play, it might take place and it might last for many weeks, and the children are the ones who are owning play. Here, these are actually cards that has been used for the pedagogical activities, but when you give the children the opportunity to use all the tools and toys you have in the preschool, or in the kindergarten, this is what happens. They wanted to play with the sequencing cards on the time when they had the free play time as well. And here they are sequencing the Very Hungry Caterpillar story cards, and they were telling the story to each other. And here, the girls were in the first picture on the left side. The girls are playing measuring. As you can see, there are small building blocks next to the other girls' feet. They were measuring their feet and hands and everything, and that's what they wanted to do on their free play time. And then the adult was also supporting there and asking questions at what you could measure next, and questions like that. And then on the other picture, children are playing with matching shape cards. Thank you. Okay, and here the children, they wanted, the picture is from Qatar, so it was quite hot outside. So the children, they wanted to paint the pavement with water, and even it was their free play, but then we were talking about what happens to the water, where does it disappear? So that's kind of where you can tag along, and then you can learn many things during the free play. Okay, and here we have a free play session, and the kids are playing and exploring with different music instruments, and then they were playing together and by themselves and making their own songs. And here, this was it's very common that in Finland, in kindergartens, you have like a trip day, maybe once a week. You might take a small trip to the park next door or the forest. This is a group under 3 years old. They were playing free play and guided play, some climbing and exploring the nature. They were collecting leaves and rocks from outside, and then we were talking about also what happens when the fall comes, what happens to the leaves and everything else. Okay. It's very important, I think it's the educator's role when we talk about play and how to make it more centric in the learning and teaching. The educator's role is to make sure that there are pedagogical learning or playing areas in the kindergarten. There needs to be some kind of tools for playing, like toys or games, role play outfits, crafting materials, whatever you have. It doesn't have to be new and shiny, but something that the children can use for playing. then it's very important to listen to children and their ideas and also inspire children's creativity. So it kind of doesn't matter what kind of things you have, you can just inspire them and make them use their imagination, and then they can build up an amazing place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuovi, for this very lifelike presentation. It was lovely to see the children and their productions and how it's largely a matter of adult mindset to see the value of the play. Thank you so much. I remind the audience to send questions to Tuovi. We will respond them later on after the following presentation. So we are turning towards the last presentation of today's webinar, and I am very pleased to welcome the final presenter, Samyukta Subramanian, and who is serving as program lead early years at Pratham Education and Foundation, one of India's largest non-profits focused on improving quality of education. She leads the early childhood education and early grades initiatives across many Indian states and has extensive experience working with government officials, private sector partners, and non-profit leaders to develop and implement education initiatives. Her focus has been on India's pre-primary education landscape and improving ECEC outcomes at scale. Samyukta holds a bachelor's degree in law and both bachelor's and master's degrees in psychology from the University of Delhi. She joined Pratham in 2008. And with these introduction words, Samyukta, the floor is yours. We still have no visual connection to Samyukta, so please can you turn on your camera? We can see a presentation, but I can't see you. Yes. At least for me, you are not visible at the moment.
Begin. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been such a pleasure listening to all the speakers before me. And I hope to be able to add a little more to everything that's been shared here. So I'll begin, and my presentation is going to be about early years at Pratham, the national education policy, and some best practices that we've learned from. I work with the, like you mentioned, I work with the early years team here, and early years for us means preschool education as well as grades 1 and 2. So that is why I say early years and not early childhood education. But as you can understand, it is deeply linked, the two, early childhood education and grades 1 and 2. So a little bit about Pratham. The organization began about 25 years back, and we have different verticals, skilling, working with vulnerable children of different age groups, research studies and surveys, and education. So today in my presentation, I'll be talking about education and research and advocacy. By that I mean that I'll be talking about early childhood education and early years in particular, and refer to the ASER survey that has thrown up a lot of data which we often refer to in order to understand this age group. The ASER survey, as Sunisha mentioned earlier, she used some of the slides from ASER, and the survey is a household survey that's done across the country with the age group of 3 to 16 years. And it covers, for example, the 2018 survey covered about 596 districts, reaching out to about 5,500 children. And so we find it nationally representative. And so when we look at that data, it gives us a picture of the country. So how do we look at the early years learning ecosystem at Pratham? For us at Pratham, when we look at preschool education and early grades, we see the child at the center of everything that's happening around him or her. So if we look at these boxes, the child is growing but with adults around him or her. And those adults could be people from the community, they could be teachers, definitely the mother and father, and many others in the community who could be siblings, or maybe lots of other people living in my community or neighborhood. And so working with each of these stakeholders who influence the child's life at this early age becomes very important. It's important to shape the growth, the understanding of play, having children play and learn. All of that comes from the understanding of the adults around the child. And so if we look at the parents, we see that parents most often, but typically mothers, spend a lot of time with children. And so we work with mothers in order to help them understand what teaching learning at this age is all about. Inside the classroom, you could have Anganwadi workers or instructors, and these instructors have a very strong influence on children, and the pedagogical processes they use are very important. And so, for example, as was being said before me, how to do free play in class, what are the pedagogical processes to be used, what are the materials, all of that makes a big difference to how the child grows. And with respect to early childhood education, it's a big influence. In the community, we find that a lot of volunteers often come to the Anganwadis, and they are young people who have a little bit of time and who can often give this time in order to interact with children and do some teaching learning activities with them. We also look at schools. Often schools have preschools within them. And so this continuity between preschool and the school. Sunisha mentioned the backward and forward linkages. These linkages need to be strengthened and need to be looked at very critically. And so this is the learning ecosystem in which the child grows. I think quite often this happens the world over. But thinking about the adults and how to work with them becomes as important as working with the child. That is our understanding. Now, how does this happen? In India, across 15 states, Pratham is working with different governments as well as directly within communities to reach out to children. The important thing to note here is there are two systems of preschool in India. One is the Anganwadi system and the other is the preschool within schools. So what do we mean by Anganwadis? Anganwadis are community-based preschool centers that are run by the government, and children from the 0 to 6 age group can come into these Anganwadis. And like Sunisha mentioned, there are many services that the Anganwadi offers, like health, nutrition, referral services, and also early childhood education. The Anganwadi worker is expected to work with all the children in that class. In contrast, you have schools which have preschools, and so you have children sitting in a preschool or in grade 1 or in grade 2. And this is a little nascent in India because typically many government schools in India began with grade 1. So you would have preschool children in Anganwadis and then they would go to schools in grade 1. Pratham partners with these governments across different states, but also across different departments. So the Anganwadi system lies with the Department of Women and Child Welfare, whereas the school system is with the Department of Education. This is an important difference to note, and I'll come back to it later in my presentation. So across the country, we are there with state governments, whether in schools or in Anganwadis. And I will talk a little more about how we partner with the government in later. But it's important to note that whether it is Anganwadis or schools, the focus is on preschool education and grades 1 and 2. The focus is on working with systems, whether with districts, in blocks, or at the state level. So coming to the NEP, the National Education Policy India, which has already been mentioned earlier, I will now be talking a little bit about what the recommendations of the NEP are, what our learnings and challenges have been, and therefore what are the recommendations. So if we look at the first thing about the National Education Policy, the policy is extremely important because it has come in after many years. More than 25 years later, we have a national education policy, and the policy divides the entire age group into a few segments. The policy is a short one but divided into 4 chapters, and the first chapter talks about the foundational, the early childhood care and education being as the foundation of learning. So it talks about the 3 to 8 year age group, it talks about pre-primary and 1 and 2, and then it goes on to talk about grades 3 to 5, 6 to 8 and high school education. The policy also talks about the fact that if you don't know how to read and do basic math in the early years, by the beginning of by the end of grade 3, then the rest of the policy is irrelevant for everyone who's trying to get through this education system. And so it becomes very important here to understand that the foundations, what do we do in the early years, will actually determine what happens in later years. So this is taken from the National Education Policy, and as you can see, if we look at the bottom of the pyramid, it's 2 years and 3 years, and that's all foundational learning years. That's 3 years of preschool and grades 1 and 2. And the policy says a strong base is very important to ensure overall development. This is a departure because the policy in the past has really not talked about the early years, the foundational stages, in the way that the NEP 2020 has. It's also important to understand that they talk about the age of entry into grade 1 at age 6. But now if we look at the reality, if we look at our assert data, if we look at where are children actually going at this age, we find a very mixed picture. And so the policy, what the policy is saying is important, but recognizing the challenges that are in front of us, given the realities, also becomes equally important. So if we look at the data today in India, you see a very varied picture. So we spoke about Anganwadis, and you have many children at age 3 to 5 going in there. But we also spoke about preschools within government schools. You have some children going there. And then you have others who are in government schools, which means that these are schools that begin with grade 1. And you have children at age 5 also sitting in grade 1. You also have children who are not going anywhere, especially at age 3 and 4, they are not going anywhere at all. And so this recommendation that at age 6, children must enter grade 1 looks very scattered across institutions, but also across age groups. And so when we look at the age, if we look at age 6, we find that in a government school, there are only about 50% children who are sitting in at age 6 in grade 1, which is the right place to be. And why this emphasis? Why is it so important to say that you must have children at age 6 in grade 1? It's because we find that some of the data that we have in front of us shows that if you are older and you are sitting in grade 1, the chances of you grasping what is happening in grade 1 are very high. This is a small example from a state in Punjab, just to say that if you want to see which children recognize letters by age, you will find that older children are able to do it. And hence the importance of looking at this reality and also at the policy recommendation to ensure that children actually enter grade 1 by age 6. As of today, it's multi-age, and we need to recognize this, and to be able to do this, we need legislation in every state to ensure that children actually enter grade 1 by age 6. The other thing to note about the NEP is that the early childhood education can be provided in different ways. It could be done in separately standing Anganwadis. Anganwadis could be inside government schools. It could be around pre-primary sections within primary schools, or it could be standalone preschools. It could even be private preschools. Now, the thing to note here, especially in our entire government system, is that with every state, we find that the nature of this provisioning looks very, very different. Eastern part of India. And here we see that maximum children at age 3 to 5 are actually in Anganwadis. They then move to government schools by age 6 to a great extent. But in direct contrast, if you look at the state below, which is a state in the north, Uttar Pradesh, a very populous state, we find that at age 3, this number is very, very low for Anganwadis. And it is equally low for other institutions because maximum children seem to not be enrolled anywhere. And so this provisioning, therefore, becomes very important because every state's reality is different. And so when we plan and think about what is the provisioning that my state needs and how do I support it, it's so important to look at the data from my state to see where are children really going at this point. Another example is Punjab, where we find that maximum many children are enrolled, but maximum are going to private institutions. So this is yet another example of where children could be going. So in the first example, we had children going to Anganwadis. In the second, you didn't have children enrolled. And in this third example, you have children not, I mean, you have 22% not enrolled at age 3, but you also have many children who are not in government systems. So I think the recommendation to be made and the challenge to be overcome is that, you know, we cannot have a rule that fits all. We would need to take into consideration what's happening in every state and then accordingly think about where it is that the strengthening is required. Another thing that the NAP talks about is capacity building. It talks about capacity building of teachers and workers and the kind of certificate courses that should be created so that we can have a professionally qualified system of people who are educators and able to deliver in any setting. But the important point to be kept in mind here, is that there are many challenges, as we just saw in terms of the data across the country. And keeping this in mind, the continuity from pre-primary to Anganwadi or primary schooling has to be thought about. So it is not enough to do training of early childhood education separately for Anganwadis and to do it separately for schools, but it is important to look at it together and look at it as pre-primary and grades 1 and 2. My colleague earlier mentioned about preschoolification of the early grades, and I call that the continuum, making sure that children in every grade are getting the kind of inputs that are required in terms of schooling, in terms of curriculum, in terms of training, and in terms of assessment. I think this continuum has to be kept in mind. So if it's schooling, we have to look at where are children and how are they moving. In terms of curriculum, can the content, if it's about all-around development and all the different activities for play and learning, can that happen across the age group of 3 to 8? Can the training happen across different departments? And can assessments be in such a way that they are not in silos, but taking into account what children should know before they come in, what they should know before they enter grade 1? I think these are some of the things that we really need to look at closely given our realities. This is another recommendation of the National Education Policy, which is that the different departments need to work together. So at the beginning, I mentioned that the Anganwadis are with a different department and the schools are with the education department. And the policy recommends that the departments must work together and they must also work with health and other departments that are connected to early childhood work. And here our recommendation is to make sure that the departments actually work together. So in meetings, in taking decisions, this collaboration is important, not just at the curricular and training level, but also at the top level where decisions are taken, and that's beginning to happen now in India. And also to make sure that after the training, if the training can happen together between the departments in every layer, then also to make sure that the monitoring and support can happen together as well. So at the end of the day, our goal is to ensure that all children are ready for school and grades 1 and 2 and further. So to do that, if we could actually have this collaboration implemented in letter and spirit, then I feel that the recommendations of the policy would actually be implemented. The National Education Policy also talks about community participation. And this is something that's very important. And in COVID years, I think almost everyone across the country has seen how important it is to work with parents and volunteers. And in order to implement this, the recommendation that we would like to make is that partnerships with the community are as important as partnerships with the government. Without this partnership, especially in the early years, it is not possible to achieve the kind of outcomes that we aspire for. And what does this partnership look like? I can share some examples from Pratham about what we do with parents and especially mothers. But I think every school system and Anganwadi system, they can be connected with parents, but they also need to think through what is it they need to do on a regular basis so that parents are involved and they support what happens in school back at home. So some examples that at Pratham we have tried, and we are also scaling up with the government in some states, is to say that in communities, during holidays and even when schools are on, it really helps to make groups of parents, especially mothers, across the communities. What this means is that for a certain amount of time, mothers groups meet and then they discuss and try to play some of the activities that are done in class. Parent-teacher meetings are equally important, but mothers leaning on each other to take forward the teaching learning for their children is extremely important. Having regular workshops, especially at schools for mothers. Often when we talk to parents, they say that we don't know what it means to learn in the early years. We do not know what it means to think about child safety. And so opening out what it means to use local resources to play, what it means to keep your children safe, what it means to learn in the early years, workshops conducted regularly by schools, as much as possible, really helps for the community to partner with the school systems. It's also important to have mobilization drives to to make sure that children and parents are aware that they need to come to school. School readiness fairs in the community to see, are children ready for school? Are schools ready for children? These can be very interesting and exciting places to open out play and learning. Sharing WhatsApp and SMS is something that we have learned to do over the years. We share the messages with mothers, and then mothers understand the message, and then they actually carry out the activity with their children. So now I will just share two practices which have been very exciting for our children and mothers in the community. These are the school readiness fairs that I mentioned earlier. Here in the school readiness fairs, we have a community where we mobilize all the volunteers, the siblings, all the adult stakeholders that we talked about, the parent, the teacher, the worker, the sibling, the college going person, all of them come together and we set up booths. By booth, I mean it's like a stall where you could get some food to eat, you could do some drawings, but for the early years, you would have each booth dedicated to a certain development. So you would have some activities for motor development at a booth, and children and their mothers would come, they would try to do the activity, and then they would go to the next booth on socio-emotional development. Maybe you need to recognize some expressions there, or you need to tell us, how do you, what's the face you make when someone snatches something away from you? So you have these little activities that happen at the booth for socio-emotional development. Then you go to the stall for cognitive development, where you separate out vegetables. Maybe you need to arrange things in sequence. And then you come to a language stall where you may need to recognize letters or look at things in a poster and identify them or tell us a story. And then comes math. And so at the end of this entire fair for a child and his or her parent, there's a little report card which is filled in. It's a pictorial report card to see how the child is doing. And then some simple activities are shared with the parent so that we say that we'll do this in class, but you want to do this at home too. And because the parent has seen this at every stall, she knows what needs to be done at home now. And she knows that, play in the early years is not just play. It's the best way to learn. And that's the part that we are opening out. We are also preparing them to say, when you go to grade 1, you want your children to know many of these things. That way they'll be able to cope with what happens in school. So,
I have a couple of minutes left.
Okay, thank you. So this was my example of a best practice school readiness melas, and for everyone in Hindi we call a fair a mela, and everyone who's listening and watching, you're invited to come to India to our fair and see how it's done in different states. The second practice I want to share with you is a video, and here you will see mothers engaging with children in class and children using local resources to learn in the community, in class and at home. So I'll request Ari to play the video for me. I'm going to take down my presentation now.
So it seems that the video is has been watched. And thank you very much, Samyukta, for your absolutely gorgeous presentation. It was very elaborative, and the examples of your ways to engage the parents were very informative. For the remaining 15 minutes, we have a couple of questions in the chat, both for Tuovi and for Samyukta. And maybe Samyukta is having, do we still have you online?
I'll try to join back so that my camera comes on. Just give me a second, yeah?
Okay, so then we will move onwards with Tuovi's question. So there was a particular question in the chat, which you probably already saw, but I will read it aloud anyways. So the question was, the question who the person asks says, thank you for sharing your wonderful examples of guided play and free play examples. But the question is, are there any ways that these free play or guided play activities could be evaluated in terms of child outcomes?
Well, it's a difficult question. Maybe like when Kati talked about the pedagogical documentation, I think you could use the pedagogical documentation if we want to kind of evaluate, like, but then we would talk about individual child and their skills, or like, for example, if we have a child who has difficulties of sharing something or sharing with friends, following the rules, then you can easily kind of evaluate how he or she learns through play, with guided play and free play. That's just about kind of observing the children while they're playing, and then maybe intervening on the play while you are there if it looks like that they need help. But for example, like that, so there's so many skills. All the skills are the things that you can kind of assess in this way through the play and while they are playing. I hope this answered at least a little bit on the question.
Tuovi, and perhaps just, you know, saying that there aren't hardly any ways to assess child outcomes in Finnish early childhood education, but Kati would like to make a note.
Yes, I would like to point out that there are some forms you can use, for example, in evaluating children's well-being and involvement. And of course, both of those are very crucial to children's learning. So you can actually measure by using the Löwen scales from Verlavers, maybe you know him, how well children in your class are being and how well they are involved in the activities. And if those both things are on a good level, then you also can know that they have the best learning opportunities. And this might be one way to evaluate their progress through play in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kati. That was an excellent point being made. I would then turn the question to Samyukta. There are two questions actually for you in the chat. And the first one is, as you mentioned, early childhood education centers are very much women-centric. There is very less to no role of the other genders, as you also mothers, as it is the common belief that mothers are the primary caregivers. What do you think? Is it something we should be facilitating to our children, and how can we change this?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm afraid my camera does not want to cooperate with me today, so please bear with me. But that's a great question. So I think, yes, it is commonly believed that mothers and children, especially at this young age, they spend a lot of time together. That does not mean that we should not work with fathers or grandparents. Quite often we see children with their grandparents, and they spend time with their siblings. And I think we should look at all genders who come in contact with young children. The point to keep in mind, I think, is that while many interact with children, there are some who influence children in a big way, and their decisions are therefore taken based on the person who is, spending that time with them and influencing them. And because mothers and children spend so much time together, we feel that it's an important moment to recognize that teaching learning happens in all these interactions. There are those organizations that work with fathers and how they can work with children. And I think that is equally important. But quite often we find that fathers play an important role, but are not able to give the kind of time that is required with children. So I think if we begin to work with fathers, we need to begin there to say what kind of time can they spend, and then what is the quality of the time that they spend with the child.
Thank you very much, Samyukta. Would other presenters like to produce their comments to this topic?
I could say that I'm a bit over 50 years of age now, and I have grandchildren, and I have been watching closely what is going on in Finnish family life nowadays. And during my lifetime, a big change has happened in our society, and we see totally different kind of fathers today than 20 years ago. So it's a big cultural question too, and also requires some support from the government, I think.
Thank you, Kati. There is one more question for Samyukta, which I probably should read now. So there are policies laid down for early years, but as mentioned by you, every state has a different scenario. Can decentralization of policies according to the needs of the stakeholders of each state can help in curbing few issues related to early years?
Yes. I think, yes, I think the important point to be made was that decentralization is important. While the policy is at the national level, every state can decide on what works best for them. Education is on the concurrent list in the Constitution. That means that both states and center can legislate on it. And so I think that if states could take into account the evidence that is there for their own states, the data that is presenting itself, and then take decisions, which they can take, they are allowed to take in a decentralized way, then I think the paths may be different, but then the goal can be achieved across the country.
What about Tuovi and Kati? Are there similarities in the Finnish society that should be taken into account, or do you recognize similar challenges? If not, then we're probably approaching towards the end of our webinar. There is one more question that I would like to raise into discussion after hearing your lovely presentations, your very the way your experiences spoke within the presentation. It was amazing. I was left to wonder, what is the role of the very young children in the systems in the Finnish early childhood education and in Indian early childhood education when we talk about the children who are under the age of 3?
Well, is it okay, Kati, or do you, I'll go first. Well, it depends, I think it depends who you ask. There are a lot of people in Finland who think that the best place for a child under 3 years old is at home or a place that feels like home and maybe not the daycare centers. I believe that there are so many things under 3 years old children that they can learn throughout the day in the daycare centers, the groups, as long as they are as small as the law requires. They are very safe places to learn social skills and many other skills. And I feel that younger the children are, you can see the pedagogy, and it should be seen with the bigger children as well, but you can see the pedagogy throughout the day. I think it starts when you come to the kindergarten and you start taking your outdoor clothes off, and then you name different clothes, and it's kind of the learning happens all the time, especially with the younger children.
Yes, that's true. And when we know that the human brain develops most before the age of 6, so we can understand quite easily why it's so important to kind of fill the brains or build the connections in the brains as well as we can. And of course, there is again the dilemma of high quality and not so good quality in early childhood education. Of course, it's not useful to put our 2 years of old children to a bad quality kindergarten. So it's really important that the education and all the environments and so on are good at the kindergarten. And also we know that the early childhood education and care supports best those children and also those families who have some kind of problems, challenges in their lives. And the more there are problems, the importanter it's to give the child an opportunity to learn and to be the part of the early childhood education structures and so on. So there are many important things they can get, even if they don't need kind of friends yet when they are 2 years old.
Thank you for these responses. Do we have Samyukta still online?
Yes.
Would you like to add to the questions presented?
Yes. So I think in India, what we see now is that more and more children below the age of 3 are coming into Anganwadis, play school centers. That's probably, there could be many reasons for that. Also that parents are working, their children need to be taken care of. So the Anganwadi center is like a play center and a daycare center. And so children are already there. And for them to engage in these kind of activities is very, very useful, as long as the teacher knows what to do with each age group and how children are progressing. Quite often, dealing with multi-age children in the same class can be quite challenging. And so I think it's an issue of capacity and how many children are in class. But if they can engage in age-appropriate activities, it would be lots of fun for them and for the teacher. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We still have like 2 minutes of our webinar time, and perhaps I would like to raise a few topics that kind of caught my eye while listening to your expert presentations. And what came to me was how delicate balance there is actually between the structures and processes within the ECEC system, looking at how delicately these different policy-making decisions and the concrete structures that there are in the society kind of determine how the ECEC is being implemented. And at the same time, we see that the kind of the strategy towards good quality ECEC and child-centered pedagogies runs through the processes. It runs through the curriculum. It runs through these good professionals, highly qualified professionals who know how to change the mindsets in ECEC towards seeing the child at the center of the attention. So maybe these are the thoughts that I am bringing with me, and I hope that each and everyone who has been listening has been able to create their own vision of Finnish and Indian ECEC. I thank you very much for taking part, and I hope that the discussion stays lively, perhaps through email or other avenues also after this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck to you all with your efforts in early childhood education. And it's really important, the job you are doing. Thank you.